Former North Carolina Central quarterback Davius Richard gives a very positive update on his health, and it's one that could greatly impact his draft stock. Oh, yeah, it's Locked On HBCU. Play my music.
You are Locked On HBCU, your daily podcast covering HBCU sports. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, family? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On HBCU podcast, your number one daily one-stop shop for everything HBCU athletics, Monday through Friday, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I, of course, am Darian Gray, a.k.a. the Mouth of the South, Texas Southern alum and former TSU Herald Sports editor and current contributing writer at USA Today's Saints Wire. Thank you for going on this journey with me. Make it Locked On HBCU, your first listen of the day, every day. And remember, just because the mic cuts off does not mean that the journey is over. Just means it's time to follow me on Twitter at South Exclusives. Over there on the video side, you see it. Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go, and I admit it, my competitive side loves Monopoly Go. This is a mobile hit twist on the classic Monopoly game. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go now, free at the App Store or Google Play. We'll wrap up. We have a friend, Mo Carter, coming on the show from Fox54, and he'll be discussing Alabama A&M spring game and answering some of my concerns about the quarterback position. Prior to that, the transfer portal has another change. This thing is very fluid, and this one is very pro player, and I think I don't know you. You may or may not be happy to hear this. I'll let you know when we get to it. But we kick off today's episode, and this will be the last episode of the week. I have some business I got to take care of. We will have no Friday episode. So this is our final episode before we get into real draft talk. So let's get into Davius Richard's draft stock, because he just shared a very positive update on his health. How does this impact his stock? So let's first lay the groundwork. Davius Richard is the biggest name in HBCU football entering the NFL draft. Is he the premier prospect? No, it seems to be you have two fighting it out for the top, and Richard isn't one of them. You got two guys who were brought into the NFL scouting combine. You have, like, those are the premier prospects, right? So whether that's Drew, whether that's Donkwa, those are your players that you're bringing in as your quote-unquote premier prospects, in my opinion. And we'll get more into that at the start of next week. But with Davius Richard, he's the biggest name. He's the one that we're looking for more than anybody else. And a lot of that, probably 90% of that, has to do with the fact that he plays quarterback. And a lot of people think that he could have been the guy who was going to break the drought of HBCU quarterbacks being drafted. In my opinion, on February 24th, all of that went down the drain when he dislocated his ankle at the HBCU Legacy Bowl. That is still, to me, a black eye on the event, not going into next year, but this year's rendition. It's a black eye on the 2024 HBCU Legacy Bowl. It's one of the most frustrating things about it, and it made it very difficult to enjoy afterwards. And I don't feel any differently 2 months later or a month and a half later. I don't feel differently in that. But let's not harp on it, right? Because if you dwell on the past, it continues to be your present. But for me, Davius Richard's draft stock plummeted that day. But we have some good news, because according to Tom Pelissero of the NFL Network, they were able to reset Richard's ankle non-surgically. Now, the reason that's interesting to me is because I don't have too many timelines on what it means when you have a non-surgical repair to a dislocated ankle. When I did my Googles and I looked it up, because, hey, I talk sports for a living. I'm not a doctor. But when I did do my Google doctor, right, they said about 4 to 6 months. That's what I heard originally. And then I got some more information, and they said about, hey, 3 months after surgery is when you can begin to start doing cutting and impact. He plays football. Basically, no football activity for at least the first 3 months. I don't know what the next month to 3 months is going to be, but that was the timeline that I was able to get. I would assume that non-surgical is going to have a very similar, if not exact, timeline. I doubt that it'll be even faster, right? So basically, no really getting back to football until a month from now. You have this injury at the end of February, so you're looking at the end of May, which means they're going to have to draft him without him really being in any football activity. But you know what? That's okay. That's okay, because now you can walk in and you can say, I will be healthy. That's completely different, because if he's going to be ready, let me give you the update. I didn't even give you that. The update is that Davius Richard said he will be ready for training camp. That's the update, because I'm starting to get ahead of myself and just what the rehab is and going off of the range. But he set his bar. He'll be ready for mini camp or training camp, which is 5 months after he sustained the injury. Remember, the initial recovery time was 4 to 6 months, which puts him right on line. At 5 months, depending on if you want to look at it, it's right in the middle. I think that's right on time. It's not early, it's not late, right? It's right in between the earliest month and the latest month. That's very positive for a couple of reasons. But if we're going to bring it strictly to his draft stock, right? If we're only going to do that, Davius Richard saying he'll be ready by training camp, to me, makes him a draftable player. He has the talent, he has the moments, he has the things that you would want to get a draft or to be a draft pick. But I don't think that he was gonna get it done with being injured. Like, that's just me being honest. Davius Richard saying that he'll be ready for training camp, to me, makes him draftable in April. If he can go up to all of these teams and say, this is what the doctor says, this is when I'll be ready, well, now we can start having conversations. Because when you were injured as an FCS quarterback, HBCU quarterback specifically, you already know you have an uphill battle. You know how hard it is to run uphill with a dislocated ankle? And I use that metaphor because, yes, he literally has a dislocated ankle, but if you're talking just figuratively, this was already going to be a tough battle, and having an injury made it even tougher. So now he made it a little bit easier on himself by saying, I'll be ready by this date. And now all of a sudden, everything you did in 2022, when you're going up against a top 25 team and you drop 350 and 3 touchdowns, now all of these things become, they get a little bit clear, right? When you can tell me that you're healthy, 350 and 3 touchdowns against a top 25 team comes back to my memory. But when you're injured, all of those things are off the table. They don't really matter as much. I'm just telling you how I think they're operating in the war rooms when they're having these conversations. So I think that by going in and saying, I'm healthy, I'll be healthy by this point specifically, now you're looking at Davius Richard returning to being a potentially low draft pick, as far as 6th, 7th round. I think that he can be a priority free agent. And if we expand this conversation beyond just the draft stock and we go to his professional profile, now you can get in at training camp. I'm assuming that means that you'll be able to run. He'll probably still have a little bit of a ramp up time, but I'm assuming that he'll be able to do most, if not all, of the activities when training camp starts. He'll get preseason. If you can get preseason as a late round draft pick, if you can get preseason, you can potentially make the roster. I think that if he was going to miss most of training camp, that probably meant he misses most of preseason. It was going to be very difficult for him to stick anywhere. And I don't think as a late round draft pick at quarterback, if you don't go out there in training camp and prove yourself anything, and he wouldn't have the opportunity to, it's very difficult for me to believe you would have made it to the next offseason. So if we're looking at draft stock, if we're looking at professional profile, these updates are very important for Davius Richard. And hopefully we can get even earlier, because I want to see what he can do in training camp. I want to see what he can do in preseason. I don't watch everybody, but if Davius Richard is able to play a preseason game, you can best believe I'll be checking out whatever team that he's playing for. Now, as you push forward, speaking of whatever team you're playing for, it can change between any moment. And with the transfer portal rules, nobody ever has to sit out again, and you can transfer as many times as possible. I don't know you. You may love it. You may hate it. But this is what it is now. Today's episode is brought to you by Yahoo Finance. And when it comes to your financial future, you think you've done it all. You've saved, you've researched, you've invested all that you can. Now you need to take those investments to the next level by using what every financial great uses, and that is Yahoo Finance. For more than 25 years, that's a quarter century. For more than 25 years, Yahoo Finance has been the brand behind every great investor. So whether you're a seasoned investor, you've been doing this for a while, or if you're looking for a little extra guidance because everybody needs to start, Yahoo Finance is perfect for you. It allows the black belt to learn some more things and allows the white belt to progress through its journey. So Yahoo Finance gives you all of the tools and data that you need in one place. For comprehensive financial news and analysis, visit the brand behind every financial investor, and that is yahoofinance.com. That's the number one financial destination, yahoofinance.com. Once again, that is yahoofinance.com. As we continue rolling on today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day for your second listen. I hope that you've already checked out the Locked On NFL mock draft. At the time that I'm recording this, it's 4:55 Central Time. So I got about an hour. I got some other things I got to do. Gonna go for a quick run, and then I'm gonna check out the Locked On NFL mock draft. And I can't wait to see who my boy Ross got in this 14 seed. See, I got my Saints hat on for a reason, repping the team. Go check out the Locked On NFL draft. It's gonna be on the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel. They'll be happy with me going a little bit longer, right? But anyway, let's get into this transfer portal because the transfer portal has changed again. And if you're paying attention to the landscape of college football, college basketball, just college athletics in general, you know all about the transfer portal and you know how volatile that it can be. And if you are a everydayer of this show, if you're a viewer of this show, if you're tuning in, you like HBCU football. More likely than not, right? I'm just going to be honest with you. I feel like I have more viewers who are football centric than basketball centric, and that's not a big surprise. But whether you're football or basketball, the transfer portal has attacked you. And you probably had some negative feelings because the player you had high hopes for likely left for greener pastures. It's not stopping. It's not done. And no matter how upset we get, no matter how much, change, like, hey, why are we changing so much? Why are players allowed to change so much? It doesn't matter how you feel. Get used to it. You're going to see players changing more and more. You may see your favorite player have 3 colleges in his collegiate career on a regular basis. You may see that, right? Like, this is going to affect HBCU basketball more than it's going to affect HBCU football. Because the new rule is you can transfer as much as you want and never have to sit out. I think that there were some waivers because of COVID and there were different rules when it came to that. But now anybody can do it at any time. So basically, if nothing changes in 2030, when COVID and COVID rules are out of play, right? I don't know how much longer we have before the guys and the girls who were here during the COVID year are gone, but I know they will be by 2030. You're looking at recruits in 2030 who'll be able to go to 3 different colleges and never, ever, ever sit out. Diamond Johnson just had to sit out some games. I think she had to go appeal or something so that she could even play this season, but she had to miss part of the year. In football, the former rule was you could transfer once without sitting out. The second time you had to sit a year. In football, that wasn't the case because if you were getting a recruit from LSU to come to Grambling, you were going down a subdivision. So it didn't matter if it was his second time transferring because he went down a subdivision. That alone made it to where you didn't have to sit out. So I think it's very important to remember the difference between football and basketball. When you're looking at basketball, you are a mid-major. There is a Division I divide in football. There is not that divide in basketball. That doesn't exist, right? Because LSU has played Jackson State, right? So in 2022, LSU played Jackson State in the NCAA tournament, the women's NCAA tournament. That could not happen in football because they're divided between FBS and FCS. So I don't want to get into too much of the semantics, but just understand they're in different groups. But meanwhile, that recruit who went from, let's use a different school, let's use South Florida to FAMU, in basketball, you stayed on a D1 level. I hate saying it like that because technically FCS is D1 too. And it sounds just so dismissive. But the truth is, there is a divide in D1. You're staying on the same playing field. FBS and FCS are not the same playing field. That's just the God's honest truth about it, right? Like, they are not the same playing field. I hope that doesn't sound offensive. If it does, I'm sorry. It's just a fact. Meanwhile, so when I say that it's going to affect more basketball than football, is because the rule didn't really apply to football, right? Like, the second transfer was already going to play immediately if we're talking about USF to FAMU in football. But in basketball, if that shooting guard would have went from USF to Delaware State, they would have to sit out a year. That's the biggest difference. So now you just know, no matter who you get, when you get them, they'll never have to sit out. That's the easiest way to understand it. You deserve to get the background. So I wanted to tell you how it changed, because we really aren't thinking about it. And I don't think it really comes into play too frequently. But now, no matter how many times that guy transfers, maybe you're on your fourth time. Seth Towns sat out multiple years, so he's another exception to this. But no matter how many games that person has played, no matter how many times you've seen that person play, no matter how many schools you've seen them play at, they can play immediately when they come to you. That is a great thing for the player. And I'm really pro player in this. So I'm really not bothered by it. I'm not upset by it at all. So as you push forward, though, speaking about players, I want to ask about Xavier Langford. I find it hard to be confident, and my hope is that Mo Carter from Fox54 is able to instill a little bit more confidence in me. Let's see if he was able to do that in a conversation that I had earlier on yesterday, actually, with him. Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go, and I've been told I'm a competitive person. The truth is, I really don't flip my competitive switch often, but when I do, it's all the way up. Like, we had a 10, not a 9. And Monopoly Go takes me to that place. They allow me to be competitive in a very fun way. Like, it's not angry or anything, but it does scratch my competitive itch. And that's why I'm a fan of Monopoly Go. And I'm sure that you've heard about it. It's been downloaded by over 150 million times, right? But it's a great twist on the classic game of Monopoly. I have to whisper. I hope that my brother doesn't hear me, because he loves Monopoly. So whatever you do, don't tell him. That's the one person I'm not trying to compete against. But if I was competing against him, I'll be able to see if he made it to be the biggest Monopoly tycoon, which is shown on the Monopoly leaderboards. I can also take money from his vault. I can charge him rent on my iconic properties and everything in between. It scratches my competitive side in the way that it needs to be scratched. So go to the App Store or Google Play and download Monopoly Go today. All right, Mo, I'd be remiss if I didn't start with the quarterback position. That's what I speak about when there's uncertainty there. And for me, the hot potato between Xavier Langford and then Quincy Casey last year, it doesn't allow me to be confident in Langford moving forward. Do you happen to possess the confidence that I lack in the quarterback position?
I mean, one thing about Langford is that he's going to continue to be a competitor. This dude loves Alabama A&M University, and considering that he's been through so many situations that many would have just stepped away and hit the transfer portal, he has not done that. Now, I will say this. During the springtime, the quarterback competition was pretty hot. I mean, you had Langford. You also had Cornelius Quad Brown, who was in the mix last year until some injury and personal things, stepped in the way from him actually performing at the highest level. But he's back at 100%. And then Alabama A&M also has a transfer from Miami, Ohio in Avion Smith, who was a winner at Miami, Ohio during his time over there. So it's definitely a big race that will probably go into the fall camp, the latter portions of it. I mean, Langford can go ahead and say, hey, I've got the experience and I found a way to kind of mesh with these new guys. But, in this transfer portal life, guys come and go. So it's really up to him to really continue to mesh with it. I mean, he did have some solid throws in the spring game, but he also had some of them that make you say, dude, what the heck was that, But at the end of the day, he did end up throwing the game-tying touchdown pass and then the game-winning touchdown pass, if you want to give him in the kudos of that for Langford. But, yeah, I definitely think that QB room continues to be talented, and we'll see who will be QB1 come September August when they travel down to the Plains to take on Auburn.
You know, one name I didn't hear you saying there, I can't remember his name, but 6'8", 250, coming out of high school, the big quarterback. Please remind me of his name, and then also what part you think he'll play in the 2024 quarterback room.
Yeah, I know exactly who you're talking about. And, yeah, while he was a signee, he was not here in the spring.
Right.
So
of course,
because of that, I think that, he'll probably be a guy that, he may get a chance to show his works in the early portion of the preseason, but I really think that it depends on how quickly he gets to campus. Is he getting to campus in the latter part of May? Is he getting campus in June? Is he getting campus in late July, early August? So those are questions that I don't really have those answers for. And then I think it'll be a determination of where he fits in based on how quickly he can grasp the quarterback position with that playbook. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, playing QB at Alabama A&M, it's not the easiest thing in the world, and playing QB anywhere is not easy at all. But, it's a pretty complicated system that many have not been able to master. But at the same time, if you are able to get a grasp of it and lead your team, then you have a pretty good shot of playing well moving forward.
And what was that guy's name? Do you remember his name? Because it escapes me at the moment.
Oh, God.
We getting old.
You know what? Google is my best friend. So if I do this real quick.
And I'm talking through. That's how we keep the production rolling. Because when a guy's 6'8", 250 pounds playing quarterback coming out of high school, there's a lot of questioning if that style of play can transition. So
Jamar Graham.
Thank you. Jamar Graham. I feel like some people may want to look him up. So I thought it was important to give his name. But let's move off of the quarterback position. What was your biggest question heading into spring practice, and how was that question answered for you?
My biggest question was the defense. Thomas Howard made his way over from South Carolina State to be the defensive coordinator here, replacing Kindness Bullware. And I really want to know how quickly could this defense adapt to his style, and how quickly can they pick up all the schemes. And I'll say this, considering the fact that really, you only got 3 to 5 weeks to really install this and make this happen. There were some good defensive plays that were made by several of the new guys on that defensive side. And the other thing I have to keep in mind, too, is this. For many that don't know, Coach Connell Maynard has a draft the week before the spring football game. So literally you have an offensive coach and a defensive coach leading one team, and an offensive coach and a defensive coach leading the other team, and they draft players. So you could have players that are typical first teamers and typical third teamers playing next to each other, and that's how they evaluate the game competition throughout not only the week, because they have to practice together, but also during the spring game. So with that being said, it's not like, the one's defense was playing together, the two's defense was playing together, whatever. You had a mix of guys, and you kind of look at it from an individual basis. Well, looking at some of the defensive stuff, and I got a chance to talk to Coach Howard, he said that he was impressed with how quickly his guys picked some things up, but he's a perfectionist. He's a Morehouse man, so you know for sure that he wants to see the best out of the best with it, and there's still a lot of improvements that need to be made. And when you have a new scheme coming in like they did with several new coaches, including including a new defensive line coach, Cedric Thornton. He's one of the other guys that's been added to the mix or whatever. So that defense, clearly, they've got to make some strides moving forward. And their defense was kind of playing vanilla styles as well. Not a lot of blitzing, not a lot of coverage changes or whatever and stuff. But I will say that front seven, they did find ways to get after the quarterbacks no matter what team it was on. So kudos to them on the early portions of it. But I still think we've got to see more improvement from the defense in the offseason.
And I think you brought up some really important things. So you brought up Cedric Thornton, the new defensive line coach, and he also brought up the front seven's ability in the spring game. Those are two things that I thought were important to look at, because you're losing Zarion Hayes, you're losing Jordan Mitchell. Who are you looking at to supplement that pass rush? Who are you looking at as the next guys who can be the leading pass rushers for Cedric Thornton and the Alabama A&M Bulldogs?
Well, I don't want to really call out a whole lot of names right now because, there's this thing called the transfer portal, and some I could say or here could be going, the next one. We just began that portion of it. So,
Right.
yeah, I don't really want to call out too many names or whatever. From the defensive backfield standpoint, though, that the defensive back, Pate, who was a semifinalist, I want to say, for the Aeneas Williams Trophy. He was actually one of the ones held out of spring practice for precautionary reasons because of a little nick injury here or there. What I think, you bring a guy back like that to kind of lead this defense from the defensive side, and it'll kind of really start with him because of the way you playing so many teams that like to sling the ball around or whatever this upcoming year. So, we'll see how that works per se. And as I mentioned, with the transfer portal, Coach has already said, Coach Maynard has already said he's got about, maybe 4 or 5 positions he wants to still fill. More than likely defensive back or linebacker or even offensive line as well. So, still a lot of answers to come with it. But like I said, with the new defensive coordinator, Thomas Howard, he was impressed with what was going on with the guys he had coming. And they still have some other guys coming into the fold and into the mix. And for those that don't know who Thomas Howard is, of course, he played at Morehouse in the early 2000s. As a matter of fact, Denzel Washington's son was one of his teammates. And then later on, he was on the staffs at North Carolina A&T as an assistant during those times when A&T was winning all those Celebration Bowls.
Yeah, I didn't know John David Washington played ball, let alone play ball at Morehouse. I did not know that about him before his transition into acting.
Absolutely.
So, fun fact for you guys today. But also, as we close out, what was something unexpected? Maybe it was an unexpected surprise. Like, I didn't think this position was going to be that good, or I thought this position was going to be a little bit better, or this player came out of nowhere and he kind of caught my eye. What was one of your unexpected surprises from the month of practice?
Man, one of the most unexpected surprises I saw really came out of the running back group. Of course, we know that Donovan Eaglin is going to tote the load. Another guy held out for precautionary reasons and whatnot because they know what he can do, all SWAC selection. And then Morrow behind him, he continued to be quite the player. Ryan Morrow, who we saw flash the brilliance last year. But continue with that running back room, and I want to make sure I say this young man's name correctly, Isaiah Nwankwo. He had 2 rushing touchdowns, and both his rushing touchdowns were, they were breakaways. Like I think one was from 20 yards out, another one was from inside the red zone. And, not a big guy, but at the same time, he's one of those guys, it seems like once he hits the hole or whatever, if you don't really catch him after that first move, he's going to the end zone. So I think he's the type of player that can kind of supplement both Morrow and Donovan Eaglin in that running back group. And who knows, maybe they may throw him as a returner or something. That's what ended up happening with Gary Qualls many years ago, too. So, yeah, Isaiah Nwankwo was definitely a bright spot for the white team on the spring football game on that day. So just added to that loaded backfield at Alabama A&M. And one other thing I will say, the offensive line, it did well protecting their quarterback in most cases on both sides. Once again, though, like I said, Darian, you split all these teams up with first teamers, second teamers, and third teamers, and even walk-ons playing next to each other, whatever. It's kind of hard to gauge that in a certain aspect, but considering that, they didn't have a lot of sacks in this game or whatever, I will say that that's been a big improvement. But we'll have to see what the rest of the tape looks like and the rest of the season really looks like from the offseason standpoint, because right now it's not about everything on the field. It's really about what can they do in the classroom in these final few weeks before they get ready for summer.
My man. In walking, I'm going to run it back. All right, everybody do the same thing. Y'all run it back. Every time you said I'm going to go back, because if this guy can be like what you said, I'm going to make sure that I need to say his name correctly. In walking, give it to me one more time.
Nwankwo. Isaiah Nwankwo.
Nwankwo. Write it down, say it 3 times, and you'll get it. Isaiah Nwankwo. So I appreciate Mo for joining the show. Always great. I'm still not sold on Xavier Langford, but I am at least optimistic that there's a competition out there at Huntsville. But I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day. And remember, there's no episode tomorrow. We'll be back on Monday to talk the NFL draft with one question. Why does this draft season feel a lot less exciting than the ones of years past? I have that question answered already, and I'll give you that answer on Monday. In the meantime, in between time, until next time that we hear each other, family, take care, stay blessed. Peace.